June 7th, 1944. Captain James Mitchell stands on Normandy Beach at dawn, counting his men. Yesterday, they were 2,153 strong. Now only 847 answer roll call. The missing aren't just casualties. They vanished entirely. No bodies, no dog tags, nothing. What Mitchell doesn't know is that 80 years later, locals still report seeing those same soldiers walking through the Norman forests. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the U.S. Army has kept this classified for 8 decades. Welcome to Wartime Mysteries, where the shadows of military history reveal their darkest secrets. Dawn, June 7th, 1944. Omaha Beach, Sector Dog Green. The sand was still dark with blood from yesterday's assault. Twisted German obstacles jutted from the waterline like broken bones. The smell of cordite and death hung in the morning air. Captain James Mitchell, whose name we've changed to protect military records, stood beside a makeshift command post built from salvaged landing craft debris. At 32, he was older than most company commanders, a veteran of Sicily and Salerno who'd earned his rank through competence rather than connections. Sergeant Hayes, front and center. Staff Sergeant William Hayes jogged across the beach, his boots squelching in the mixture of sand and seawater that had become the foundation of the Allied foothold in Europe. Hayes was Mitchell's most trusted NCO, a tough Irish-American from Boston who'd served with the captain since North Africa. "Sir, you wanted the morning count." Mitchell's jaw was tight. "Give it to me straight, Sergeant." Hayes consulted his waterlogged clipboard. 847 men present and accounted for, sir. All companies reporting. The numbers hit Mitchell like a German 88. "Say that again, Hayes." 847, Captain, out of the 2,153 who came ashore yesterday. Mitchell felt his world shift. He'd commanded this battalion for 18 months. These weren't just numbers on a roster sheet. They were farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college students who'd left their books to carry rifles. He knew their names, their hometowns, their girlfriends' names. "Hayes, where are my missing men?" The sergeant's face was grim. "That's just it, sir. They're not missing in the usual sense. No casualties reported to the aid stations. No wounded. No bodies." Mitchell stared across the blood-soaked sand. D-Day had been hell, but even hell left evidence. Bodies. Equipment. Something. "They're just gone, sir." Private First Class Tommy Kowalski approached the command post hesitantly. The 19-year-old from Chicago's South Side had been one of the first men off the landing craft yesterday, charging German machine gun nests with the kind of fearless stupidity that won wars and killed teenagers. "Captain, sir, permission to speak?" Mitchell turned. Kowalski's usual cocky grin was replaced by something Mitchell had never seen in the kid's eyes. Fear. "What is it, Kowalski?" "Me and some of the boys, we found something weird down the beach. Figured you should take a look." Mitchell followed the private along the waterline. The tide was going out, revealing more carnage from the previous day's assault. Burned out landing craft listed in the shallows. Abandoned packs and rifles lay scattered across the sand like the contents of some massive, deadly yard sale. But what Kowalski showed him defied every bit of Mitchell's military experience. Footprints. Hundreds of them. All American combat boots, pressed deep into the wet sand in perfect formation, all leading away from the beach toward the dark tree lane, half a mile inland. "Sir, these tracks, they ain't right." Mitchell knelt beside the prints. The boot patterns were definitely U.S. Army issue, but something about them made his skin crawl. The spacing was wrong, too wide, too purposeful, as if the men who'd made them were marching with inhuman determination towards some predetermined destination. "How many sets, Kowalski?" The private swallowed hard. "We counted maybe 1,300, sir. All heading the same direction, straight into them woods." Mitchell looked toward Les Bois Morts, the dead woods, as the local French called them. The forest was ancient, its canopy so thick that even in full daylight, the interior remained shrouded in shadows. Local resistance fighters had warned them about these woods during the pre-invasion briefings. "People go in," the French partisan had said in broken English. "They don't come out." At the time, Mitchell had dismissed it as peasant superstition. Now, staring at those impossible tracks, he wasn't so sure. Alpha 6, this is Alpha 6 Actual. Mitchell grabbed his field radio. Go ahead, Actual. Charlie Company reports similar findings on their sector. Tracks leading inland. No personnel accounted for. Request instructions. Mitchell closed his eyes. Charlie Company had landed 3 miles east of his position. If they were seeing the same thing, Alpha 6 Actual, stand by for orders. He turned to Hayes. Sergeant, organize a search party. 20 men, full combat load. We're going into those woods. Hayes looked toward the tree line and crossed himself. Sir, maybe we should wait for reinforcements from the beachhead. Sergeant, I've got over 1,000 men unaccounted for. They could be wounded, captured, or worse. We don't wait for anyone. But as Mitchell stared into the mouth of Les Bois Morts, something cold settled in his stomach. The woods seemed to be watching him, waiting. Maybe the French had been right after all. 0800 hours. Assembly Point Tango 7, 200 meters inland from Omaha Beach. Mitchell's search party consisted of 20 volunteers from different companies. Each man carried a full combat load. M1 Garand rifle, 80 rounds of ammunition, first aid kit, rations for 24 hours, and enough determination to march into hell if their captain ordered it. The team included Sergeant Hayes as second in command, Corporal Davis the medic, Private Kowalski on point, and 17 other soldiers, whose names would soon be added to a very classified list. Listen up, Mitchell addressed his men. We've got over 1,000 Americans missing somewhere in those woods. Our job is to find them and bring them home. Watch your spacing, maintain noise discipline, and nobody, and I mean nobody, breaks formation without orders. The men nodded grimly. They'd survived the hell of D-Day. How bad could a French forest be? Mitchell keyed his radio one final time before entering the woods. Overwatch, this is Search Party Alpha. We are proceeding into the target area. Maintain radio contact on the hour. Copy, Alpha. Good hunting. The forest was older than Christianity. Ancient oak trees, some of them over 1,000 years old, rose like cathedral pillars, supporting a canopy, so dense it blocked out most of the morning sun. The temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment they crossed the tree line. And then there was the silence. Not the normal quiet of a woodland. This was the silence of a tomb. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. No small animals rustled through the undergrowth. The only sound was the soft crunch of 20 pairs of combat boots moving through dead leaves. Jesus, whispered Corporal Davis, his Tennessee drawl barely audible. This place gives me the creeps. Mitchell held up a closed fist, the signal for silence. But there was nothing to hear except their own breathing and the whisper of wind through ancient branches. The tracks were still there. Clear boot prints pressed deep into the forest floor, leading deeper into Les Bois Morts with mechanical precision. All American, all wrong. Private Morrison, a farm boy from Nebraska, pointed to a set of prints near his position. Captain, these tracks, they're fresh. Can't be more than a day old. Mitchell examined the prints Morrison indicated. The edges were sharp, the tread pattern clearly defined, but the stride length was impossible for a human being. Too long, too regular, as if whatever made them hadn't been walking so much as marching to some unheard cadence. Keep moving, Mitchell ordered. Maintain formation. They tracked for an hour through the increasingly oppressive forest. The trees seemed to press closer with each step, and the silence grew heavier, more absolute. Several men reported feeling dizzy, nauseous. Corporal Davis checked them for signs of gas exposure, but found nothing. Sir, Kowalski's voice was barely above a whisper. You feel that? Mitchell nodded. The air itself felt thick, oppressive, like walking through invisible molasses. It was getting harder to breathe, and his compass was behaving strangely, the needle spinning in lazy circles. That's when they found the clearing. It was perfectly circular, 50 yards across, carved out of the ancient forest like a wound in the earth. The grass within the circle wasn't brown or withered. It was gray, a sickly color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and scattered across the dead grass were personal items. Thousands of them. Dog tags glinted in the filtered sunlight. Helmets lay overturned like empty skulls. M1 rifles were scattered randomly, some with bayonets still fixed. Photographs of sweethearts and mothers lay curled and fading. Wedding rings caught what little light penetrated the canopy. Bibles, lucky coins, rabbits' feet that hadn't been lucky enough. Sweet Mother of God, Davis breathed. But it was the symbol in the center of the clearing that made Mitchell's blood run cold. Carved deep into the earth was a design unlike anything in his military experience. Interlocking spirals and angular lines that seemed to shift and writhe when he looked at them directly. The pattern was ancient, predating Christianity, predating Rome, predating anything Mitchell's 20th century mind could comprehend. "What the hell is that thing?" asked Private Morrison, his Nebraska farm boy confidence evaporating. Before Mitchell could answer, Private Henderson, a quiet kid from Oregon who rarely spoke above a whisper, pointed across the clearing with a shaking hand. "Captain, look, there, at the edge of the tree-line opposite their position, stood a figure in American uniform. For a heartbeat, Mitchell's spirit soared. One of his boys. Alive. Maybe injured, maybe disoriented, but alive. Soldier." Mitchell called out, "What's your name and unit? Are you wounded?" The figure turned at the sound of Mitchell's voice. Mitchell's words died in his throat. The face beneath the steel helmet was human in basic structure, but wrong in every detail that mattered. The skin was gray-white, like old parchment left too long in sunlight. The eyes were the worst part, completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire eye, as if they'd been filled with tar. When the thing that had once been a soldier opened its mouth, no sound emerged. But Mitchell could see that its teeth had grown pointed, sharp, predatory. The creature stood perfectly still for several seconds, neither threatening nor retreating. Then it raised its hand, not in greeting, but in what could only be interpreted as a warning. It stepped backward into the forest and vanished as completely as if it had never existed. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. The living and the dead had stared at each other across a clearing of gray grass and scattered memories, and the living had found themselves wanting. After it, Mitchell shouted, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was too late. The men spread out across the clearing, searching behind every tree, checking every shadow, but there was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no sign that anything had ever been there, except for the feeling that they were being watched. "Sir," Hayes grabbed Mitchell's arm, his voice urgent. "We need to leave. Now." Every instinct Mitchell had developed in 3 years of combat was screaming at him to run. But he was an officer in the United States Army. His men were missing, and it was his responsibility to find them. "Negative, Sergeant. We searched this area thoroughly. There might be wounded men in these woods." But as they searched, Mitchell began to notice details that made his skin crawl. The personal items scattered across the clearing weren't just random equipment. They were arranged in patterns, almost like offerings, and the gray grass seemed to pulse with its own malevolent life. Private Kowalski picked up a photograph near the forest's edge. "Captain, this is Bobby Martinez from Chicago. He was in 2nd Platoon." Mitchell took the photo. It showed a young man in uniform standing next to a pretty girl in a white dress. On the back, in careful handwriting, "To my darling Rosa, all my love, Bobby." June 1943. Martinez had been one of the missing. "Search Party Alpha, this is Overwatch. Radio check." Mitchell keyed his handset. "Overwatch, this is Alpha. We are conducting detailed search of target area. No contact with missing personnel." "Copy, Alpha. Be advised, we're getting strange reports from other search parties. Equipment malfunctions, compass readings that don't make sense. Watch yourselves out there." "Roger, Overwatch. Alpha out." Mitchell clipped the radio back to his belt and turned to count his men. 18. They'd entered the clearing with 20. Now there were 18. "Hayes, where's Morrison? Where's Henderson?" The men looked around in confusion. Both soldiers had been there when they found the clearing. Morrison had identified the boot prints. Henderson had spotted the gray soldier. Now they were simply gone. No shouts for help. No sounds of struggle. No sign they'd ever existed except for their names on Mitchell's roster. "Sir." Davis the medic was pale. This place, it ain't natural. Mitchell wanted to argue, wanted to maintain military discipline and rational thinking. But standing in that clearing of dead grass and scattered memories, with two more of his men vanished into thin air, he found himself agreeing. Some places were wrong, some places were hungry, and Les Boismorts was both. 3 days after the disaster in Les Boismorts, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hartwell stepped off a classified aircraft and into the chaos of the Normandy beachhead. Hartwell wasn't regular Army. He was OSS, Office of Strategic Services, America's wartime intelligence agency. When something needed to disappear from the historical record, they called Hartwell. At 45, Hartwell was old for field operations, but his particular skills were too valuable to waste behind a desk. He'd orchestrated cover-ups from North Africa to the Pacific, ensuring that certain military realities never reached the American public. His latest assignment: investigate the anomalous personnel losses reported in Sector Dog Green. The medical tent was a study in controlled chaos. Wounded from the ongoing battle lay on stretchers, while harried medics moved between them with practiced efficiency. In the far corner, isolated from the other casualties, sat Captain Mitchell. The man looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembled slightly, and he started at every unexpected sound. Classic symptoms of combat fatigue, but something in his expression suggested this was worse than battle shock. "Captain Mitchell, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell, OSS. I'm here about your missing personnel." Mitchell looked up slowly. "You won't believe me. Try me." For the next hour, Mitchell recounted his experience in Les Boismorts. The strange tracks, the circular clearing with its ancient symbol, the scattered personal effects of his missing men. When he got to the gray soldier with black eyes, Hartwell's expression remained neutral, professional. "Captain, you and your men have been through tremendous stress. D-Day was traumatic for everyone involved. Sometimes, under extreme pressure, the human mind creates explanations for events it can't process rationally." Mitchell's laugh was bitter. "Are you calling me crazy, Colonel? I'm saying you're human, Captain, and humans sometimes see things that aren't there." But Hartwell's professional skepticism died the next morning when he assembled his own investigation team and entered Les Boismorts. Unlike Mitchell's combat soldiers, Hartwell brought specialists: photographers with the latest equipment, cartographers with precision instruments, communications technicians with state-of-the-art radio gear, and Professor Marcus Whitman from Harvard University, an expert in European folklore who'd been temporarily assigned to military intelligence. "Gentlemen," Hartwell addressed his team at the forest's edge, "we are here to conduct a scientific investigation of reported anomalies. I want photographs, measurements, and detailed documentation of everything we find. This is not a combat mission." The forest seemed to swallow them the moment they crossed the tree line. Professor Whitman, a thin man in his 50s who looked out of place in military fatigues, immediately began taking notes. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The acoustic properties are all wrong. Sound should carry farther in a forest this dense, but it's being absorbed somehow." The photographers were having their own problems. "Sir," the lead photographer approached Hartwell nervously, "our equipment is malfunctioning. Light meters giving impossible readings, film coming out overexposed." "Keep trying," Hartwell ordered. "Document everything." They followed the same trail Mitchell had taken, past the ancient oaks and through the oppressive silence. The boot prints were still there, clear as the day they'd been made, leading deeper into Les Boismorts with mechanical precision. When they reached the circular clearing, Professor Whitman gasped audibly. "My God," he whispered, staring at the symbol carved into the earth. "I know what this is." The design was exactly as Mitchell had described it: interlocking spirals and angular lines that seemed to move when observed directly, as if the pattern were alive and writhing beneath the earth. "Well," Hartwell demanded. Whitman was pale. "It's a Celtic binding sigil. Pre-Christian, probably 15 centuries old, used in druidic rituals to anchor souls to specific locations." "English, Professor. The ancient druids believed they could prevent warrior spirits from crossing into the afterlife, bind them to the earth as eternal guardians of sacred sites." Hartwell frowned. And you think this symbol is somehow responsible for our missing man? Before Whitman could answer, the photographers started shouting, "Sir, sir, you need to see this." The lead photographer thrust a Polaroid print into Hartwell's hands. The image was impossible. It showed the clearing exactly as they were seeing it, but with additional figures, dozens of them, standing in perfect military formation among the scattered equipment. American soldiers in World War II uniforms, their faces clearly visible in the photograph. But there was no one in the clearing except Hartwell's team. "Sir," the photographer's voice shook. "These images, they're showing things we can't see." Hartwell examined more photographs. Each one showed the same thing. Soldiers standing at attention in the clearing, their faces gray-white, their eyes black as tar. The cartographers were having their own crisis. "Colonel, our instruments are going haywire. Compasses spinning, elevation readings impossible. According to our altimeters, this clearing is simultaneously at sea level and 500 feet above sea level." And then there were the sounds, not heard with the ears, but felt in the bones, like voices calling from very far away. "Help us. We're lost. Can't find a way home." Professor Whitman was frantically scribbling notes. "The binding is still active," he said urgently. "The spiritual energy that created this sigil 15 centuries ago. It's been reactivated somehow." "By what?" "Massive trauma. Death on an unprecedented scale. D-Day provided exactly the kind of psychic energy these ancient rituals required." Hartwell was about to respond when he realized his team had grown smaller. He counted heads. 15 men. They'd entered with 18. 3 more had vanished without a trace. "Base, this is Investigation Team 1. We are exiting the target area immediately. Repeat, immediate extraction required." "Copy, Investigation 1. Is there a problem?" Hartwell looked back at the clearing, where the ancient symbols seemed to pulse with malevolent life. "Negative, Base. Just completing our mission ahead of schedule." That night, Hartwell sent an encrypted message to OSS headquarters in London. "Situation Normandy exceeds normal parameters. Stop, recommend immediate classification under national security provisions. Stop, phenomenon cannot be explained through conventional military channels. Stop, request authorization for Operation Phantom Veil. Stop." The reply came 12 hours later. "Phantom Veil approved. Stop, classify all documentation top secret. Stop, prepare alternative explanation for missing personnel. Stop, this incident never occurred. Stop." Operation Phantom Veil was born from necessity and maintained through bureaucratic efficiency. Within 72 hours, new documentation appeared in military records. The 1,308 missing soldiers of the 327th Infantry Regiment were posthumously declared killed in action during D-Day operations. Their bodies were listed as unrecoverable due to heavy enemy fire and difficult terrain conditions. Each family received a telegram. "The War Department deeply regrets to inform you that your son/husband has been killed in action in the European theater. His body was not recovered due to battlefield conditions, but his sacrifice for freedom will never be forgotten." Gold Star mother pins were awarded. Folded flags were presented. Memorial services were held in small towns across America for boys who died for democracy, but whose real fate was too disturbing to acknowledge. Mrs. Margaret Thompson of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, received her telegram on July 15, 1944. "The War Department regrets to inform you that your husband, Sergeant Robert C. Thompson, has been reported killed in action in the European theater of operations." She never remarried. For 23 years, she kept Robert's stocking by the fireplace every Christmas, maintained his empty grave at Arlington National Cemetery, and wrote letters to the War Department requesting more information about her husband's death. She never received satisfactory answers. But secrets have a way of seeping through even the most carefully constructed classifications, especially when those secrets refuse to stay buried. Marie Dubois lived alone in a stone farmhouse on the edge of Les Bois Morts. Her husband Pierre had been shot by German soldiers during the occupation, executed for the crime of hiding downed Allied airmen. She'd buried him beneath the old apple tree in her yard, next to the graves of his father and grandfather. At 63, Marie was accustomed to solitude. On the night of August 15th, 1944, she was awakened by the sound of footsteps in her yard. Marie had lived through 4 years of German occupation. She knew the sound of military boots, the cadence of soldiers on patrol. But these footsteps were different, too regular, too purposeful, like a machine designed to mimic human movement. She crept to her bedroom window and peered through the lace curtains. An American soldier stood beneath the apple tree where Pierre was buried. Young, barely more than a boy, with sandy hair visible beneath his steel helmet. He wore the same uniform she'd seen on the liberators who'd driven the Germans from her village. But something about his stillness was deeply unsettling. The soldier stood perfectly motionless, staring down at Pierre's grave with what Marie could only describe as infinite sadness. His face was pale in the moonlight, almost luminescent, and when she looked closer, she realized his eyes were completely black. Marie watched for nearly an hour, too frightened to move or call out. Finally, as dawn approached, the soldier turned and began walking toward Les Bois Morts. But instead of following the path that led to the road, he walked directly through the stone wall that bordered Marie's property. He passed through 2 feet of solid stone, as if it were morning mist. Marie never reported what she'd seen. In a village that had survived 4 years of Nazi occupation, American ghosts seemed like a minor problem. Pierre Leclerc was the finest hunter in Normandy. He'd been tracking game through these forests since he was old enough to carry his grandfather's rifle. He'd never lost his way in Les Bois Morts. Until the autumn of 1945, Pierre was following a wounded stag when he realized he was in a part of the forest he'd never seen before. The trees were wrong here, twisted into unnatural shapes, their branches interweaving in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ground was soft and spongy beneath his feet, like walking on unmarked graves. That's when he heard the marching. At first, Pierre thought it might be American soldiers on patrol, but as the sound grew closer, he realized something was wrong. The footsteps were too regular, too synchronized. No human unit could maintain such perfect cadence for extended periods. Pierre pressed himself against the trunk of an ancient oak and held his breath as they approached. They emerged from behind the trees, like smoke given form. Dozens of American soldiers in perfect formation, marching through the forest in ranks of 4. Their uniforms were mud-stained and torn, their faces gray-white in the filtered sunlight, but their feet made no sound on the forest floor. Pierre watched in fascination and terror as the Phantom Battalion passed within arm's reach of his hiding place. He could see every detail, the serial numbers on their rifles, the dog tags around their necks, the unit patches on their shoulders. Some bore wounds that should have been fatal, gaping chest wounds, missing limbs, heads twisted at impossible angles. Yet they marched with mechanical precision, their black eyes fixed on some distant objective that only they could see. The procession lasted 20 minutes. When the last soldier disappeared into the shadows, Pierre ran. He didn't stop running until he reached the village, and he never hunted in Les Bois Morts again. By 1950, local authorities had logged over 300 similar encounters. Father Michel Rousseau, priest of the village church, became an unofficial chronicler of these sightings. He interviewed dozens of witnesses, maintaining detailed records of their testimonies in a leather-bound journal. Father Rousseau's final entry, dated 3 days before his death from a heart attack in 1967, was perhaps the most disturbing. I have prayed for their souls for 23 years, but I fear my prayers cannot reach them where they have gone. They are not in heaven or hell, but somewhere between, trapped in a place that exists outside God's creation. Something holds them here, binds them with chains stronger than death itself. May God forgive us for what we have awakened in Les Bois Morts. Margaret Thompson never gave up hope. For 23 years after receiving that telegram from the War Department, she maintained Robert's empty grave at Arlington National Cemetery. In 1967, at age 58, Margaret made the journey she'd been planning for decades. Using money she'd saved from her job as a telephone operator, she traveled to France to see the place where her husband had vanished. On her second day, Margaret walked to the American cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer, where a white marble headstone bearing Robert's name stood in perfect alignment with thousands of others. Margaret knelt beside Robert's marker and placed a bouquet of wildflowers. his favorites from their Iowa farm, at the base of the white stone. "I miss you," she whispered. "I've missed you every day for 23 years. That's when she saw him. He stood at the edge of the cemetery, just beyond the perfectly aligned headstones, wearing the same uniform from their wedding photograph, the same young face that had smiled at her from across the church altar. For a moment, joy flooded through Margaret's chest. He was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he'd survived and come home to her. But as she rose to her feet and started toward him, she began to notice details that her heart had initially refused to accept. Robert's uniform was torn and mud-stained, as if he'd been crawling through forest undergrowth for 23 years. His skin had the gray-white pallor of old bones bleached by sunlight, and his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had looked at her with such love and tenderness, were now completely black, like pools of tar that reflected nothing. When Robert opened his mouth to speak her name, no sound emerged. His lips moved, forming the word Margaret, but his voice had been stolen by whatever force held him in this place between life and death. Margaret stood frozen as her dead husband raised his hand, not in greeting, but in warning. He shook his head slowly, sadly, then pointed back toward the village. The message was clear: don't follow me. Don't try to join me. Go back to the world of the living while you still can. Margaret watched through tears as Robert turned and walked back toward the dark tree lane of Les Bois Morts. She wanted to call out, to run after him, to demand answers from whatever cosmic force had stolen her husband and kept him for over 2 decades. But something in his black eyes had warned her that some reunions were too dangerous to pursue. Margaret returned to Cedar Rapids, but she never stopped trying to tell Robert's story. She wrote letters to congressmen, senators, and newspaper editors. Most treated her as a grieving widow unable to accept her loss. Margaret died alone in 1982, still convinced that her husband was waiting for her in the forests of France, still hoping that someone would rescue him from his eternal patrol. Her final diary entry, found beside her bed, read simply, "I'm coming, Robert. Wait for me." The end of the Cold War brought unprecedented transparency to military records. In 1994, thousands of classified documents from World War II were released to the public under the Freedom of Information Act. Among them was a heavily redacted file labeled Operation Phantom Veil, Normandy Anomalies 1944 to 1967. Dr. James Patterson, a military historian at Georgetown University, discovered the file while researching a book about D-Day intelligence failures. What he found challenged everything he thought he knew about the Normandy campaign. The unredacted portions contained Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell's complete investigation report, including photographs of the forest clearing and witness statements from both military personnel and French civilians. Most shocking of all were audio recordings made by OSS operatives who had returned to Les Bois Morts repeatedly between 1947 and 1950. The recordings, made on primitive wire equipment, captured voices speaking in English, American soldiers calling out to each other in the darkness of the ancient forest. "Charlie section, report your position." "We're lost, Sarge. Can't find the rally point. Been walking for hours. Nothing looks familiar. God help us, we can't get out." The most disturbing recording was made at 0347 hours on November 11th, 1947, 3 years after D-Day. A clear voice spoke directly into the OSS microphone. "Is someone there? Can you hear us? We've been walking for so long. We can't find our way out of these woods. Something's wrong with us. We know something's wrong, but we can't remember what happened. Please, if anyone can hear this, tell our families we're sorry. Tell them we tried to come home." Patterson's investigation revealed that sightings of the Phantom Battalion continued well into the 21st century. Local police reports documented hundreds of encounters. 2001, a group of American college students backpacking through Normandy reported meeting soldiers in World War II uniforms while camping near Les Bois Morts. "They warned us not to go into certain parts of the forest," one student wrote, said it wasn't safe for the living. 2019, a paranormal investigation team recorded over 6 hours of audio in Les Bois Morts, including what appeared to be military radio communications in English. Most recently, in 2023, A French forestry supervisor photographed what appears to be an American soldier standing among the ancient oaks. The figure is translucent, barely visible, but the uniform details are clearly identifiable as D-Day era equipment. I see them sometimes, he told a local newspaper. Usually at dawn or dusk, when the light is strange. They don't bother anyone. They're just lost, still looking for their way home after all these years. On June 6, 2024, the 80th anniversary of D-Day, an unprecedented ceremony took place at the edge of Les Bois Morts. For the first time since 1944, active-duty U.S. Army personnel entered the forest with official authorization. General Patricia Williams, commanding general of U.S. Army Europe and Africa, led a small ceremony attended by French officials, surviving D-Day veterans, and family members of the missing soldiers. The ceremony's purpose was simple but profound: to officially end the Phantom Battalion's mission and grant them permission to stand down after 8 decades of service. General Williams read from a prepared statement: "To the soldiers of the 327th Infantry Regiment who have maintained their vigil in these woods since June 1944, your mission is complete. Your duty has been fulfilled with honor and distinction. The war you were sent to fight has been won. Democracy has triumphed over tyranny. The world you died to protect has been preserved for future generations. By the authority vested in me by the United States Army and the government of the United States of America, I hereby order the 1,308 soldiers of the Phantom Battalion to stand down from active duty. Your watch has ended. You are relieved of your posts. You have permission to go home." What happened next was witnessed by everyone present and recorded on multiple cameras. The ancient Celtic binding sigil, carved deep into the earth 15 centuries earlier, began to crack. The interlocking spirals and angular lines that had trapped souls for millennia started to break apart, stone crumbling to dust. Mist rose from the forest floor, coalescing into human shapes that gradually became visible to the naked eye. One by one, the soldiers of the Phantom Battalion emerged from Les Bois Morts for the final time. They looked exactly as witness reports had described them for 80 years. Young men in World War II uniforms, their faces pale but peaceful, their eyes no longer black, but restored to their natural colors. Private Thomas Kowalski was among the first to appear. He approached General Williams and saluted with parade ground precision. "Permission to report, man." "Report, soldier." 327th Infantry Regiment mission complete. All personnel accounted for and ready for final formation. The soldiers formed ranks in the forest clearing where they had been trapped for 8 decades. They stood at attention in perfect military formation as General Williams conducted one final roll call. "When I call your name, you are dismissed from service. You are free to go home." One by one, she read the names of all 1,308 missing soldiers. As each name was called, that soldier stepped forward, saluted, and began to fade like morning mist in sunlight. Some paused to speak with family members who had come to the ceremony. Others simply nodded to the assembled witnesses before disappearing entirely. Sergeant Robert C. Thompson was the last name called. He stepped forward, saluted General Williams, then turned toward Rebecca Thompson Walsh, Margaret's great-granddaughter. "Tell Margaret I kept my promise," he said clearly. "Tell her I waited for her, and now we can be together again." With those words, Sergeant Thompson saluted one final time and faded from view. The ceremony concluded at sunset. The Celtic binding sigil had crumbled completely, leaving only a circle of ordinary earth where the ancient symbol had once held dominion over life and death. Today, Les Bois Morts is a peaceful forest where birds sing and small animals play among the ancient oaks. Tourists and historians visit regularly, but they report no supernatural encounters. The phantom voices, the impossible thermal signatures, the midnight patrols, all have ended. A small memorial has been erected at the site where the binding sigil once stood. It bears the names of all 1,308 soldiers who served their final mission in the shadows of Normandy, along with a simple inscription: "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." These soldiers gave their lives for freedom and continued to serve even in death. May they rest in peace at last. Claude Du Bois still lives in his aunt's farmhouse beside the forest. He tends a grave beneath the apple tree and maintains a small garden where he grows flowers for the memorial. On Veterans Day each year, he places a French and American flag side by side at the forest's edge. They were good soldiers, he reflects. They deserved better than to be forgotten in these woods. I'm glad they finally found their way home. The official U.S. Army position has not changed. The 1,308 soldiers of the 327th Infantry Regiment remain listed as killed in action on June 7, 1944. Their families continue to receive military benefits and honors. Their names remain carved on memorials across America. But now those names represent not just sacrifice, but redemption. Not just death and service, but peace finally earned. The Phantom Battalion has completed its longest mission and reported for their final duty station. Whatever lies beyond this world for soldiers who kept faith with their oath until the very end. In the end, perhaps that's what honor really means. Not just courage in battle, but loyalty that transcends death itself. Not just service to country, but service to the bonds between brothers in arms that no force in heaven or earth can break. The boys who left farms and factories and families to storm Hitler's fortress Europe came home at last, not as conquering heroes, but as old soldiers finally allowed to fade away. Their watch is ended, their duty complete. Welcome home, boys. Welcome home. Thank you for joining Wartime Mysteries for this journey into the shadows of military history. The story of the Phantom Battalion reminds us that some bonds forged in warfare transcend the boundaries of life and death itself. These accounts, drawn from classified documents, witness testimonies, and decades of research, reveal truths that official histories will never record, but they deserve to be told because the men who lived them and died for them deserve to be remembered. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel and share it with others who appreciate the hidden mysteries of military history. Your support helps ensure that these forgotten stories continue to be told. Until next time, remember that in every war, in every battle, there are mysteries that defy explanation. Some can be solved through research and investigation. Others must simply be honored and remembered. The soldiers of the Phantom Battalion served their country for 80 years after their deaths. They stood watch over the place where democracy's greatest victory was won. They kept faith with their oath until they were finally allowed to come home. That kind of devotion, that kind of honor, should never be forgotten. And now it never will be.